You were last here with your last book. You covered politicians I worked for. This is so intricate and so jarring. And I wonder if you could just sort of describe the portrait that emerges.
Well, Nicolle, I spent from January on of this year, I went through and tried to systematically look through at the events that I had covered as a White House correspondent, but I really couldn't get my head around. How did this happen? How did the disaster that culminated on January 6th take place? What was really happening behind closed doors? And the portrait that emerges is of a president who spent the entirety of 2020, and you were exactly right in your previous interview to point out that this happened far before the election. He started sowing the groundwork for this in the beginning of 2020, a systematic effort to use all means necessary to retain power, even as he realized before the election that he was likely to lose. He was sowing the groundwork to contest the election and to throw out the results and to dispute and to overturn Joe Biden's victory.
You know, and it's something, I was asking Chris Christie about that because we paid a lot of attention to it. Donald Trump was accusing Democrats of committing election fraud before the election had transpired. And he was, I think it was in North Carolina, and asked the voters of North Carolina to vote twice, which would be criminal voter fraud. Bill Barr was part of that effort. In an interview on CNN, he talked about voter fraud. And what's fascinating about your reporting is you make abundantly clear that everyone, save for the lunatics and the real sycophants, got religion. I mean, I want to read this scene about Bill Barr and then White House counsel Pat Cipollone and Mark Meadows. You write, on November 23rd, Barr met with Meadows, Cipollone, and a couple of other senior advisors close to the president. Barr later described the conversation to me, quote, "This is getting serious," he told Meadows. I mean, how far is he going to take this thing? This is complicating the transition. Barr told me, Meadows and the others assured him Trump was sensitive to the needs of the transition and would soon be changing his tone and laying the groundwork for a graceful exit. I mean, that never happened. Did they have any remorse about sort of the Frankenstein that they'd enabled to take shape around this absolute phony issue of voter fraud, of election fraud?
There were so many people around Donald Trump who believed that by staying close to him, they could keep him from doing more damage. They could restrain his more destructive tendencies. And so you hear very little regret from any of them. And some of them, Nicolle, may have taken steps to prevent this from being much worse than it could have been. And, Barr's decision to come out, whatever Barr's fault, whatever he did before, and there are many things to criticize Barr for, specifically on the issue of voter fraud as well. But when he came out and he declared the Department of Justice saw no evidence of widespread fraud, and when he refused Donald Trump's efforts to get him to use the powers of the Justice Department to pressure states to overturn their results, to seize voting machines, when he did that was a very critical moment. If he had taken the actions of the real full-on sycophants, of people like Jeffrey Clark, who later tried to become Attorney General in January, and agreed to follow his orders, this could have been a much bigger disaster than it was.
You, as you said, since January, have functioned as an investigator, and you've unearthed so much new and exclusive content. I wonder if you have a sense from investigating these characters, how much is available to the January 6th committee? How much is knowable?
I think there's a lot. I think one way to look at this is look at the presentation that the House managers made in the impeachment trial. It was powerful. It was searing. It clearly had an impact on those that watched it in the Senate floor. They played that video showing minute by minute what happened on January 6th. The January 6th committee has much more than the impeachment managers could ever have hoped to have. They have testimony. if they win this battle over executive privilege, they will have they will have documents from the White House. They will have the call logs. They will have the emails. They will be able to see who was in touch with Donald Trump. They will have photographic evidence. You know, Trump always had a photographer around him in the White House. I want to know what is on that photographer's camera from January 6th. I want to see the outtakes of the video that he released that evening, where he said, "We love you," to the people that had just stormed the Capitol. That was the acceptable version. What was on the unacceptable versions? So I think there's a lot that this committee will be able to do, and I think that and by the way, I think that we're only seeing a bit of their work right now. They've interviewed over 100 witnesses. They're doing this methodically and behind closed doors, building up to public hearings that should happen sometime late summer, and a very compelling report. But the fight of executive privilege will determine how effective it is.
I want to read from what you're just talking about, that video message. I mean, you were, I'm sure, on live TV as I was, and it was because in the moment on Fox News, Republicans after Republican were calling in, calling for the, and maybe that's something that our viewers aren't always cognizant of, but even over on Fox News, and Chris Christie was talking about doing this on ABC News, Republicans were calling on Trump to call off the dogs, to ask his supporters to stop. They were in what's been described in sworn testimony as medieval hand-to-hand combat with cops, with police officers. They were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." And this is what you write about the video message. On Trump's video message, "Go home, we love you. You are very special." That's what he finally said in the one that was released. If this was deemed an acceptable message, what was in the messages that were rejected? A White House aide who was there as the president taped it told me that in the earlier rejected versions, Trump neglected to call on his supporters to leave the Capitol. He complained about the election. He empathized with their anger, but he did not call on them to go home. How did they get anything? I mean, it's been reported in, I believe, Carol Leonnig and Phil Rucker's book that Pat Cipollone thought Donald Trump would be arrested that day. What levers did they press? Did they sort of try to impress upon him that he could face criminal exposure, or how did they get him to do something acceptable?
White House counsel Pat Cipollone warned him that if he didn't come out and do this, that he faced removal from office, either through impeachment or through the 25th Amendment, that he had to do this. But Nicolle, look at the time of the release of that video. It's hours after the riot has been underway. It took them hours to get through to him, to get him to even do what he did there, which, again, was entirely inadequate, praising the rioters. "We love you. We love you." So you raise what Mitch McConnell did in the hours after the riot, when he determined that he did not want Donald Trump to be at the inauguration because the riot had been put down, but he was worried that Trump would have one more chance to disrupt Biden's inauguration. So I looked at this and I traced this methodically. That decision by McConnell to do this got back to the White House in two ways. First, McConnell's top aide told Meadows about it, informed him that McConnell was working on this. He was putting together a letter from the other leaders. The other way it got back is, of the four leaders that McConnell wanted to have sign this letter disinviting Trump, McCarthy was opposed. McCarthy actually argued that it would be a powerful display of unity if Donald Trump showed up on January 20th, and they should encourage him to do so. So McCarthy made it clear he wasn't going to be signing any other letters. And McCarthy also informed the White House. So Donald Trump definitely knew that he was going to be disinvited from Biden's inauguration, which is why in that very last tweet that he ever sent out on January 8th, he said, "I'm not going." You know Donald Trump well enough. You've covered him long enough to know that he would never say in advance, take away all the drama, and announce 12 days in advance he wasn't coming unless he knew he was about to be disinvited. And the reason that McConnell was disinviting him is very revealing. He believed that Trump would have one more chance to disrupt the transition of power.
It's so interesting. to see McCarthy as an outlier from the other leaders. And you're reporting, I mean, a lot of the time my jaw was on the table, but this section, and I want you to do the storytelling about why McCarthy maintains his fealty to Trump, that he saw people who stood up for the country and tried to stand up for the truth as losers who will never be honored with statues on the mall. Talk about that reporting.
I recount a conversation I had with McCarthy. I actually saw him on the Mall on Saturday, January 2nd. It was the day of the Raffensperger call. It was a beautiful day in Washington. And he was out for a walk. I was out. I took a walk almost the entire length of the Mall. And McCarthy had not announced what he was going to do. Was he going to join those that were challenging Biden's electoral votes, those other House members, or was he not? And I was asking him, he wouldn't tell me. And I said to him, you know, this is a real opportunity for you to make a difference because you are the leader of the House Republicans. If you come out and you say this is all nonsense, that Joe Biden won the election, and in America, what we do is we fight hard in elections, and then we congratulate the winners, and we concede defeat if we have lost. And, you know, if you come out and you say that, you give that message, it can have a real impact. And then to make a dramatic point, I exaggerated. I pointed to, you know, the monuments on the Mall, and I said, who knows? If you do the right thing and you do it powerfully enough, maybe there'll be a statue of you out here someday. And he laughed at me, and it's probably laughable as it is. But he said, where's the statue for Jeff Flake? Where's the statue for that guy from Tennessee, meaning Bob Corker. The two senators who really took on Trump in the first year of the Trump presidency and were rewarded, in McCarthy's view, with irrelevance and were exiled effectively from the Republican Party. So his point was, if he does that, he'll go away just like they did. It won't have an impact. And then he tried to explain to me that by staying close to Trump, he'd been able to control his more destructive instincts.
Which ones? I mean, there was a deadly insurrection at the Capitol on McCarthy's watch.
Well, this is January 2nd, to be fair. This is before the insurrection. But he pointed to the, I don't know, you remember when Trump suddenly around Christmas Eve said he was going to veto the COVID relief bill and he might veto the funding bill. We could have a shutdown in the middle of the pandemic. It would have been a disaster. McCarthy is one who, in McCarthy's view, and he's probably right about this, effectively talked Trump out of those vetoes and averted a big disaster over the holidays. But there's a lot else. There's a lot else that went down, obviously.